It was the 1970s. It was a hot summer in New York, and three out-of-work actors, myself, Griffin Dunne, and Mark Metcalf, met up.
First, I met Mark, and he was in a play called Streamers that Mike Nichols directed. David Ray wrote. My roommate was Carrie Fisher, who I grew up with as a childhood friend, and when she moved to New York, we got an apartment together, and it was near the Lincoln Center, and we went and we saw Streamers. It just blew my mind, and then we met the cast afterwards, and Mark and I really hit it off.
I actually met Griffin Dunne at a party, and he was very close friends with Mark.
Anyway, I met Amy there and recognized her as Teresa from Mean Streets. Assumed she was Italian. I remember going to see her in Soho the first time when Soho was really, a real Italian neighborhood. And I picked her up on Spring Street, and we were walking down the street, and kids would yell out their window, "Teresa! Yo, Teresa!" And I go, "Is that for you?" She goes, yeah. They all saw Mean Streets.
And we started hanging out, and there was a lot of creative energy among the three of us. And I had a favorite writer. I was always a big reader, and Ann Beattie was my favorite New Yorker writer. So I saw that she had a novel, her first novel, and I bought it, and I read it, and I gave it to Mark and Griffin, and I said, I think this would make a good movie. And they read it, and they agreed with me. And then a long process happened of how we were able to get the rights, which we got, and how we were able to get a wonderful writer-director like Joan Micklin Silver. But
that started Triple Play Productions.
We were baseball fans. I particularly was a baseball fan, and there were three of us. So it seemed like a good name, Triple Play Productions. And then when Mark decided really to go more back to acting, we couldn't be Triple Play anymore.
So Amy and I continued, and we became Double Play Productions.
Baby It's You was always an idea that somewhat came out of my own life. I grew up in Trenton, New Jersey, and I'm Jewish, and my father was a doctor, although my sisters were always annoyed because they're not in the movie. Jill Rosen was an only child in the movie.
Amy had told me about the Sheik, about the story of her life as we got to know each other, about her life in Trenton, and wanting to be an actor, and then going to Sarah Lawrence, in the '60s, and what a tremendous change that was in her life, and culturally, and what how exciting the '60s were, and leaving behind this guy she called the Sheik.
We started pitching the idea of Baby It's You around because we had entered the business with Chilly Scenes of Winter being sort of in the studio system because the movie was made by the studio system. And what we found was a lot of guys who worked in Hollywood would say, we'd pitch the story about the Sheik and this Jewish girl, and all these guys would say, "Oh, I was just like the Sheik in high school." It was a very identifiable and kind of glamorous character.
And then we went to John Sayles.
And we had seen Return of the Secaucus 7, and we really loved Return of the Secaucus 7.
And he just immediately responded. He just got it immediately.
Yet he identified, I think, also with the Sheik. He grew up in upstate New York, and he was living in Hoboken at the time. It was developed originally at 20th Century Fox, and then they didn't want to make the movie. So Paramount was interested in it, and Paramount at that time was run by Michael Eisner and Jeffrey Katzenberg. Jeffrey particularly liked this movie, and we made it kind of back in the day where you could make things a little bit under the table, meaning Paramount put up the money, but it went into a bank, and there was a bank loan, and so because it was quite low budget, even then for a studio picture. So, but Jeffrey was always very involved with it, and Michael Eisner, it turned out, had gone to Lawrenceville, which again where we shot. But there's a line in the movie about the girls from Miss Fine's school, and Miss Fine's school was like this fancy school where fancy girls went, not Trenton High. And when he heard that line, it made him very nostalgic because Miss Fine's school was in Princeton, and the things that catch people's attention.
He started like writing it on these yellow legal tablets by hand, just already. I think he knocked out the first draft in record time.
Griffin claims that John wrote the whole first draft on the plane ride home. I told him a lot of stories of things that had happened to me, and some of the things in the movie were similar to things that had happened in my life. We went down to Trenton and we looked around. There was a character who was like the Sheik. He liked to lip sync to Sinatra, just that scene in the movie. It wasn't in a nightclub, but I do remember once he was in my living room and my father was not happy with this guy being around, but he was lip syncing to Sinatra, and he said, "Amy, there are only 3 people in the world: Jesus Christ, Frank Sinatra, and me." So that came right out of his mouth, and as he said it, I thought, I had no idea I was going to be a producer. I wanted to be an actress, blah, 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 blah. I said, I'm going to use that line. So I told it to John when we were developing this, and it is in the movie. Even when I was in high school, I listened to a lot of Sinatra records. I came from Trenton, New Jersey. Trenton, New Jersey is sort of equidistance between New York and Philadelphia. So music played a huge part in all of our lives. There was the Philadelphia sound, there was the New York sound. We went down the shore in the summer. There was always music playing in the car, on the radio, Murray the K, all of these iconic things. And then John extrapolated from that and wrote the script.
There was never a conversation on Amy's part going, oh, well, that's not what happened. And it happened like that. Whatever he brought to it was real and truthful for the characters. Amy was very good at, disassociating her own life from a movie that tells a story that's about someone that's not her.
As we moved along, he wrote a lot of the music into the script. He really understood. One of the movies that I think was, at least for me, was an inspiration was a movie called Splendor in the Grass, which I saw when I was in high school. And it was a really romantic movie directed by Elia Kazan, starring a very young Warren Beatty and Natalie Wood. And it was a tortured romance, and it was not a happy ending, and it was people of 2 different classes. And one of the things I think that really appealed to John about the story of Baby and Jew were the class differences of these 2 people and what paths their life were going to take. The transition from Trenton, New Jersey to Sarah Lawrence did happen. And the transition of, 60s high school to 60s smoking pot in dorm rooms did happen. But the trip to Florida where she goes to see him and she loses her virginity to him, apparently, did not happen and came out of John's brain. The ending of the movie and the heartbreak of that last dance was nothing that happened in real life. That part of the movie is really all comes out of John's brain.
We like the looseness, we love the dialogue, we love the way it was set and the way it captured the time period of the 60s. That was an important part, the period. John captured that that beautifully.
And that was very important to us. And very, I think, important to John in terms of why he wanted to do the movie. We were all going through this transition. And, I think it was Rosanna's idea to, her hair is very straight and proper in the high school version, and then she gets a perm. And, it's kind of wild. I think what John captured was early, when she says,
"That's not who I want to be. I don't know what I want, but it's not that."
it was early feminism, really, of what she wanted to do with her life. And yet this boy had been very important and emotional for her. And again, I this was really more John than what happened to me. The basics of the story and some of it. I mean, the one thing in the movie that did happen to me, and it was very similar to the way the scene is played in the movie, was the kidnapping.
Marjorie Simpkin was our casting director. She knew every up-and-coming actor.
We saw many, many, many actresses to play Jill, and wonderful actresses. But Griffin had just worked with Rosanna in a television movie called The Wall.
We were stranded in Soviet bloc country Poland. We were only supposed to be there for a month. We were there for 3.5 months. The country went into martial law during the uprising in Gdansk. And we became really good friends.
She came in and she was just so full of life and energy and beautiful and looked nothing like me. It wasn't, there were other actresses that came in that were taller and darker and all of that, but she embodied something.
She had a complexity to her. You'd see her brain going at a feverish pitch all the time and questioning about things and, kind of neurotic. And she just sort of captured Jill's dilemma, of wanting to do something with herself and wanting to be an actress, and that terrible feeling of falling out of love and actually outgrowing, someone who meant so much to you at one point in your life, like the Sheik. The frustration with her parents, that teenage thing where your parents, everything they say is just so annoying. She could just bring all of that to the character.
I love the scene which John he didn't completely make it up. The scene where she goes out and she gets drunk and throws up, and she's out with the more sophisticated people. It's a fantastic scene, and it did not happen to me, but I did witness another girl throw up at sort of a country club in Westchester. It's so embarrassing. But, the scenes of Jill trying to fit in with all of these different, more sophisticated girls, and her pull back to the Sheik, and who is this sort of romantic figure that she, in the movie, is mythologizing. And Vincent, we saw every young actor, and a lot of them, it's amazing. I mean, I think we saw Sean Penn, we saw...
Tom Cruise auditioned. When I directed Practical Magic years later, Nicole Kidman, who he was married to, was in the movie, and Tom came to the set, and I put out my hand to shake him, and he put out his hand, and he said, "You didn't give me the part in Baby It's You." And I thought, how could, with all the things that he's done, that's what he remembers? Our first choice was Matt Dillon. Amy and I went to see Over the Edge, and it had just come out, but it was in a small arty theater. And Amy and I and somebody sitting a row or two in front were the only ones in the theater, and this person was eavesdropping, and as we're talking about Matt, and the person in the row or two in front turned around after the movie and he said, "You should check out this guy Vincent Spano. It's the same manager, Vic Ramos." So we called up Vic and met Vincent, and it was that's the guy.
He was so handsome and such a wonderful actor, and handsome in this old school kind of Sinatra-y way, not the James Dean-y kind of way.
You know, we would be shooting night shoots, and incredibly cold nights in certain days. And John wore a tank top T-shirt through, no matter what was going on, no matter how below the temperature. I don't know how he survived like that. He never wore a coat, no matter how cold it was. But his vibe as a director was so relaxed. You know, I was still acting. I wanted to, continue my acting. And I remember just being so envious of the actors that I hired to have the fun I wanted to have with John, and gave the actors all the room they needed. He just made it look so easy.
Day to day, we were there every day. We had a third associate producer who we then worked with on After Hours, named Robert Colesbury. And Bob, who is no longer with us, was fantastic. And he was somewhat the line producer with a pal of his named Tom Rosano. And everybody in the show had some relation to it. Bobby Colesbury grew up in Philly, and he was a really good line dancer, and he liked to dance, and he knew this milieu. And we were there every day. I would say there was a lot of not troubleshooting, because that's partly your job as a producer. Once you've gotten the movie going, you want to stand back and say, what's going on over here, and how do we help with this? And, John was obviously busy dealing with the actors, and we had been lucky enough to get Michael Ballhaus, who had obviously done all of his fantastic German work, but he had just did a little movie called, I think it was called Dear Mr. Wonderful, with Joe Pesci. And we got to see that movie, and we got to Michael, and we hired Michael. And this was really the first, well, Dear Mr. Wonderful was an American movie, but this was a little bit bigger than that.
I remember when Michael Ballhaus read the script, John always had in the script a Bruce Springsteen song, the anachronism of a Bruce Springsteen song. Placed where it was in the script is where it appeared on the screen. And Ballhaus would listen on the Walkmans that came out at the time, and he would listen to Bruce Springsteen while reading the script, and then said, "Oh, I must do this movie. This is wonderful." He signed on.
So you see in the movie, I think, a lot of what you later saw in After Hours, long tracking shots and his ability to move the camera, and Michael operated, because that was the European tradition. He also captured the emotion of the actors, and that probably has to do with his parents being actors. I mean, there's that scene, I actually have a still of it, a clip of when Rosanna's sitting on the bed after she slept with Vincent, and it's on her back, and there's slats of light on her back, and it's very film noir. And I also love the scenes where on the steps at Sarah Lawrence, where she's so emotional and they're fighting, and the energy between the two of them, he captures, but he captures it in a simple way. I mean, we're not doing Dutch angles, and it's just a two-shot, and they're in a location, and he was brilliant. He was brilliant. Jeffrey Townsend, who was the brother of Claire Townsend, who was very instrumental in Chilly Scenes of Winter, was our production designer. So it was very much a family.
Yeah, we would all hang out afterwards on Friday after it wrapped, and we were right around here. I was just thinking where we are now. There's the Beaver Street Bar. I remember we would go to and stay up screaming way into the night after we wrapped.
We filmed most of it in Hoboken, around Hoboken. We went down to Trenton to do some Trenton Makes the World Takes. We shot the Sarah Lawrence scenes at Lawrenceville, the prep school. We shot a lot of the interiors of Miami in New Jersey, and we went down to Florida for a couple days to shoot exteriors. John wrote a lot of the songs into the script. And the idea of using all music from the period except for the Springsteen, which wasn't of the period, obviously. But Griffin, in my memory, it was the one who really was listening to Bruce Springsteen. And he kept saying, this music is the right music for Baby It's You. And John started listening to it, and John really loved it. And then John started thinking where he could use the Springsteen. But we had to get the Springsteen. So we went to John Landau, who was his manager. And this was before Bruce was the boss. I mean, he wasn't huge, he was successful, but we gave Landau the script, and Landau really got it. And I can't remember if Bruce himself read the script at that point, but Landau said, yes, I'm going to let you use the music, and he did not charge us a lot of money. It was very nominal.
Bruce was just completely on board.
Griffin worked very, very, very hard getting the rights and keeping everything in his little briefcase.
Well, it was a very tall order to deliver all the music that we had in mind. We had a music supervisor, quite a legendary guy named Joel Dorn from Atlantic, when he was a producer in his own right. There was, a lot of people who I had to deal with and that I would read about in Hitman and go, oh my God, I can't believe I went to that guy's house and asked him for the thing. I'm lucky I didn't get killed. But we had, I had made a favored nations deal with all the artists, which means no one gets paid more or less than a particular number. I think it was like $2,500 for the master and $2,500 for the publishing. So it took a lot of convincing. Sometimes I would have a personal connection and go that way. I knew Paul Simon, again through Carrie Fisher, who, was my friend from childhood, and they were going out. Paul agreed to this favored nations deal, and he called up, he was at CBS, and he called up Walter Yetnikoff and said, I gave this kid the rights for so much. And Walter went, okay. And I'm in my office in Hoboken, and I get a call, and my assistant goes, it's Walter Yetnikoff calling for you. And I can't believe the president of CBS Records is calling me. That's so impressive. And so I pick up the phone. I go, hello? He goes, you motherfucker, you piece of shit, fuck, you're getting... And he screams at me for going through Paul to get the rights. And I had to hold the phone away from my ear. But he agreed to it, and I got the rights to a Paul Simon song for a song.
We had to have the Sinatra, and we got in touch with Sinatra's lawyer, and he looked at the script and he liked it, and he said, you got to give $1,000 to the Carmelite sisters in Burbank, and then you can use the song. So, it was a little bit wild and woolly.
We always had the nagging problem, should technology change? We didn't get the cassette or DVD rights, and that became kind of a mess for later on.
Griffin and I did this podcast recently, and the two young women were talking about it, the emotion of the ending, which it was, even when we were shooting it, the dance. And again, there was a bit of an homage in that to Splendor in the Grass. And she was wearing a dress that was almost like a 50s dress. They start to play Strangers in the Night, and it's so emotional. I love that scene.
They became involved when we finished shooting, and we had our first cut, and we had our test screenings.
I think it was hard for John. He wasn't used to the studio system. We went out and tested the movie, and
they had like a lot of notes, and it was kind of heavy going for a while, And Amy and I were in a very tough position of agreeing, quite honestly, with some of the studio's notes and siding with John.
We brought in a second editor, and that was a whole drama within itself, a guy named Jerry Greenberg. And the editor, who was wonderful, her name was Sonia Polanski, and she was going to quit. And Jerry Greenberg convinced her not to quit, that they should work on it together and they could help to make it a little bit smoother and better. And of course, then they fell in love, Sonia and Jerry, and they had a relationship for quite a while. Wow. So it was a little bit of Baby It's You in the cutting room.
Every movie, especially during test screenings and, with the studio, with their notes, and tensions arise. I've never seen it not happen.
There were screenings of the two cuts, and really they weren't that radically different. The Paramount cut was a little bit shorter, and John, then it went back to John. They said, John, you decide what you want to do. You're the director, it's your movie. And it wasn't like the studio took it away. And he actually incorporated a lot, or some, of what was in the Greenberg's Polanski, let's call it that, cut into what became the final cut of the movie.
It just kind of worked out, eventually. We were the ugly sister, or whatever that expression is. And they didn't expect Flashdance to do anything. They were really after a younger audience, and they saw Baby It's You to attract that younger audience. And the same with Flashdance. Suddenly their scores went way up, and we were completely eclipsed. So it was a modest opening, a modest reception, and the kind of film that just some diehards just really love, and then other people at the time just never heard of it.
Even when it came out, as I say, it wasn't a huge success, but within Hollywood, a lot of people saw it and liked it very, very much. And I think it spoke to them. And one of the funniest ones, because as I say, for me, Splendor in the Grass was a huge, iconic movie that we were aspiring to with this. And after the movie came out, the phone rang in our office, and it was Warren Beatty. And he called and he said, I saw your movie, Baby It's You. It's really terrific.
A book came out that it's the last book on earth you would ever want to be in. The best little movies you never heard of. And we had 2 of them in it. And this is not a book I wanted to be in. And Baby It's You and Chilly Scenes of Winter. That's why I'm very, very happy to be talking and having a whole new audience.
This is very fourth hand. But I once heard that Sinatra had seen the movie and did like the use of the music. This is what we heard, but it was very fourth hand. But I like to think that he saw it, he saw the ending, and all of it, and liked it.
I saw it not long ago with fresh eyes, having not seen it in a while. And I was really taken with how well it stood up, how emotional it was, how specific it was to a certain period of time in a woman's life.
I feel very grateful that we got to make this movie with the people that we got to make it with. And I include everybody who brought their A game to this small, what I like to say is handmade movie. That really, there was a lot of love put into it from every angle. And so I'm grateful to you for putting out a new version of it, and I hope that it's pleasing to a lot of people.
I was really proud of it. It was just enough time had gone by until I saw it that I could really look at it and see it with fresh eyes, and as if I had nothing to do with it, just watch it as a movie. And I thought, boy, this is a really good movie.